Welcome to the fourth of 5 sessions of They Are Us. We're excited tonight to jump into chapter 5 of They Are Us, which is entitled A More Just Future, 4 Spiritual Values. So tonight from the North Carolina Synod Immigration and Refugee team, we have Professor Mary Ballard on deck to highlight the key takeaways from chapter 5. And we'll begin there and then we'll discuss chapter 5 after. So Mary?
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. There we go. I don't often share my screen from somebody else. I can still see people. It's hard for me to talk to a blank screen.
Yes.
So I'm talking about chapter 5. As Carissa said, it's a more just future for spiritual values. And what I'm going to do is not just summarize the chapter, but I'm going to talk about these themes. And I've chosen a scripture for each theme. I'm going to talk about kind of how's it going with regard to each of the themes. And then I'm going to talk about some stuff that we've been doing in our community, more the Immigrant Justice Coalition than my congregation, as my congregation's just now starting to get involved in these issues. And then at the end, I want you all to kind of be thinking about what your community or your congregation is doing well in terms of these 4 themes. And so the 4 spiritual values asks the question, does the proposal promote family unity? Does the proposal promote human rights and workers' rights? Does the proposal promote the ability to live without fear? And does the proposal promote a path to citizenship? And so we'll start out with the family unity piece there. By the way, go back for just a second. This tiny little girl was born in the US. Her family is undocumented, but she's absolutely obsessed with the adult dancing group in our community. And so someone made her a little dress and she wore it to this fundraiser that we had for our local scholarship. Her mom was setting up a table. We had a lot of displays around the room of people setting up displays for their particular Latinx culture. And these are the adult dancers that she's obsessed with. But in terms of family unity, the scripture I chose is from Proverbs 17:6. And it says, children's children are a crown to the aged, and parents are the pride of their children. And I liked this because it is very intergenerational and what it's referring to. And I think that most of the time when people think about family unity, they think about this kind of intergenerational family unity. And so when we ask the question, how's it working in terms of the proposals to that are currently in place for the immigration system, it's not really working all that well. And Jenny and Susan, I think maybe even Dave talked about this with their presentations, but the formal process for this can take years. And the paperwork is really hard, as it is for a lot of these kinds of things. Of course, more recently, we've been really concerned about children being separated from their families at the border and then put in these internment camps and treated very poorly, not cared for. And Biden and Harris started this family reunification task force, but as far as I can tell, they have not done a lot yet. after my presentation, if Dave has some thoughts about this, I'd welcome hearing if he thinks the Family Reunification Task Force is being very effective. The other thing, and Bauman doesn't talk about this, by the way, but it's kind of more traditional societal definition of family involving only blood or legal marriage. I'd like to point out that not everyone comes from families that are safe harbors and families of support. Sometimes there's abuse or maltreatment or a lack of acceptance of people in families, particularly youth in families. And so sometimes their family, maybe people that they chose that are supportive and loving and caring and that can provide that safe harbor. But nothing that I've seen kind of broadens the definition for children, for example, who have escaped from these difficult circumstances. Finally, for family unity, some of the things that we've done in our community is people who are involved in the Immigrant Justice Coalition. And this was a little bit before I got involved with it, so I know about it, but I wasn't a sponsor. But they sponsored elders from Mexico to visit their families in Boone. Many of these parents and grandparents hadn't seen their children in decades. They'd never seen their grandparents. There were these very joyous, emotional reunions. And we're talking about doing this activity again and sponsoring people to come from Mexico and other places in Latin America to visit their families in Boone as well. One of the other things that we've been concerned about is, and not in Boone, but in other places, parents have suddenly been deported while their children were at school, and then their kids are just left hanging and don't have anybody to turn to, don't have any legal recourse. And so we have done, I think, 2 or 3 now, power of attorney workshops in our community where lawyers come in pro bono and they help people with the paperwork to assign someone in the community who is documented or who is a citizen to have power of attorney over their children in case they're deported. And so hopefully ICE won't come in and raid and take a bunch of people from our community like some of the examples in the book. But if they do, many of the children in our community will be supported legally by someone who has the power of attorney to get them medical care and to take care of them and that kind of thing. The second theme is human rights and workers' rights. And I chose a scripture that is more tied to workers' rights. It's Jeremiah 22:13. And it says, "Woe to him who builds his palace by unrighteousness, his upper rooms by injustice, making his countrymen work for nothing and not paying them for their labor." And again, asking kind of, how's it working? Again, not all that well broadly. Farm workers and also workers in poultry plants and that kind of thing are often treated poorly. You'll remember early in the pandemic, one of the first real outbreaks of COVID were in some of the poultry plants and communities and neighboring counties of Boone. And from what I heard, people were not encouraged to stay away from work when they were sick. It went through the poultry plants to some cases where they had to actually shut down. It was a humanitarian and a medical crisis. They're often not paid well. They have substandard housing. And someone, I liked this last week, so I stole this from somebody. If you want to take credit for it, fine, do that. But taxation without representation, because a lot of these workers are paying taxes, but they're not allowed to work. And of course, there's real backlash if you even suggest that these people be allowed to vote. deportation, no driver's license in most states. And I've got a picture of my friend Jorge on here later. And Jorge used to have a driver's license in North Carolina, and that right was stripped away in North Carolina. And I don't think we're anywhere close to getting it back again. And of course, not having a driver's license makes it difficult to get to work because you're not doing it legally if you're driving without a license, but it also places people at risk for arrest and for deportation. And so that's a big concern. So one of the things that we've done in our community, and I've been involved with 3 of these now, I think, is a Faith Action ID drive. This isn't a legal document, but Faith Action will come in, you fill out paperwork, they take a picture, and they produce an ID card that people can show if they get pulled over or at stores, that kind of thing. And we have overall really good police in our community. And one of the things about the Faith Action ID drive is the police in the community have to accept the ID. And so we have a fine a chief of the police. His name is Andy. He's a great guy. He took over a few years ago and has really shaped the police force in ways that are very promising. And then our sheriff, Lynn Hageman, who just got reelected, has been really good as well. So they accept the Faith Action ID drive. If someone gets pulled over, they will take it. Also, we've worked with some local businesses and banks so that people can use their Faith Action ID drive to open a bank account, because if you don't have a legal ID, it's really hard to do that. And so our community has been pretty responsive to this. Also, our health department has had a big focus on farm workers. To try to assure, for example, that they were vaccinated, that there are places that they can go for healthcare concerns and that sort of thing. I flipped too far. This is Jorge, by the way. I'm in the middle between him and Kat, our community resource officer. So the scripture for the ability to live without fear is from Isaiah 42:16. I will lead the blind by ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths, I will guide them. I will turn the darkness into light before them and make the rough places smooth. These are the things I will do. I will not forsake them. And again, asking, how's it working? Not well. ICE is terrifying. And I think it was about 3 years ago, we had scheduled a Faith Action ID drive, and we had had enormous response to the previous one. But a week or so before this one was to be held, there were ICE raids in parts of North Carolina, including Asheville, and people were afraid to come out. Because they were afraid it might be, I guess, some kind of entrapment or something like that. Again, our police have really made an effort, I think, to be accepting and welcoming and to work with the immigrant community. But the police in some cities are pretty terrifying as well. Although I keep my fingers crossed that our community stays relatively welcoming. Things that we've done is the salsa dances we did were, again, for our immigrant scholarships that we give to immigrant youth who graduated from Watauga High School, but they were community dances and they were led by someone who was well known in the community. We also had tortillas for sale and some booths and stuff like that. And the Latinx community was very involved with it. We actually had 2 because the first one was so successful. And one of the things, I put this in, the ability to live without fear. The research indicates that the more interaction you have with people that you perceive as different from you, the less you perceive them as different from you, and the less fear you have of them, and the more accepting you are of them. And so the salsa dances serve the purpose of raising money, but also to kind of have this integrative community spirit and help people get to know one another. The picture with me and Kat and Jorge is at one of the farmers markets where it was Latinx Day. And again, people had booths and we had dancing, and community members were able to mingle together in a very safe kind of way. Coffee with a Cop was not invented by Andy or the Boone Cops, but they've had several of these kind of meet and greet sorts of things where they answer questions. The Latinx community has been very involved with them. And the link here is an article about Coffee with a Cop coming back after it had been suspended for a few years while the pandemic was at its height. The pandemic is not over, by the way. The final spiritual value is a path to citizenship. And my scripture for this is from Leviticus, and I use King James Version here just because I like the phrasing of it better. And if a stranger sojourn then in your land, ye shall not vex him, but the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And again, how's it working? People who know more about this than I have talked about this, but it's not working well. There's not a clear, easy path to citizenship. It takes years. It's expensive. The forms are difficult to complete. This particular link is the Department of I'm blanking on what it is, but it is the one you go to become a citizen. And even the face page I found confusing when I went to look at it the other day. In terms of my community, there's not as much that we're doing directly to try to help with the path to citizenship, other than some political activism. I've met with other members of the team, with representatives from Senator Tillis's office a couple of times regarding DACA and the Afghan Adjustment Act. And so now that we're getting new people in office, we just need to continue to pound at them with this political activism. But one of the things we are talking about doing in our community is setting up workshops to help people go through this process with people who are knowledgeable about all the paperwork and that kind of thing. And so that's my presentation. And so my question to you for discussion is, what do you think your congregation or community is doing well to promote these 4 spiritual values? And I'm going to stop my shares so that everybody can see each other.
Thank you, Miriam. I'm going to type that discussion question in the chat for our
Okay.
reference to. Any thoughts from our team, immigration team members, or anyone else on the call around? What does your congregation or community do well in promoting these 4 spiritual values?
And just as a reminder, the values are family unity, human and workers' rights, the ability to live without fear, and a path to citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I can mention is Christ the King Church that I'm a member of in Cary. We have our group that's been supporting a Syrian family. So the first item, as far as the proposal for the immigration system to promote family unity, as the refugees come to the United States that have been vetted and working through the refugee system, you know, they come as a family unit, and other members of the task force I know are also active in supporting refugee families. And these families are kept together as a unit. The parents are not separated from the children. And so the support to the refugee families is as a unit to keep them all together and help them with the English as a second language, help them with transportation to doctors and schools, food shopping, etc. So it's very important as we all are supporting a refugee family, that we continue to treat them as a family unit. And just to follow up on what Mary was asking about as far as the children's separation issue at the beginning of Mary's discussion. From what we understand, of course, from the previous administration, they had a very harsh program of separating children from their parents as they crossed the southern border without any documentation, as they deported the parents out of the United States back to some country that may not be their native land, either in Central or South America. The previous administration had no formal records of where these parents were being sent, where the children were ending up. So the Biden-Harris administration, as Mary mentioned, had put together a task force at the beginning of their administration in 2021. And maybe a few months old, but the numbers that I remember are they've reunited out of about 1,000 children that were separated. They've reunited about 600 or 700. There are maybe about 400 or so that they're still searching for the parents. They've actually sent staff to Central and South America trying to track down where the parents were deported to. So they have people scouring south of the border for the parents to reunite the children with them. And the task force is still active, to my knowledge. And even today, as families are crossing the southern border seeking asylum, the parents and children are kept together. They're not separated as they work through the asylum process.
Great, Dave. Thanks for, I knew that you knew a lot more about that than I did. So thanks for filling in. And Jenny has her hand raised.
I do. Just following up on the community involvement, we are fortunate to have Faith Action International here in Greensboro, the ones that started the national program for IDs. And just an add-on to the worker ID, when they do the training, when they do the sign up for the worker ID, they do it in conjunction with the police department. The police are actually there, either the people that can speak Spanish, the police officers do. If not, it's translated. And then what we try to do symbolically is for those of us that have citizenship and have a regular driver's license to also get the worker ID, to make it known in the community that this is a legitimate and recognized ID.
Yeah, a number of people in our community did that as well.
Yeah, it's a good idea. One fun thing that's happening on Monday night, for the first time now in 3 years, is Faith Action has an international dinner, and people come and bring a dish from their own country. And when last we had 3 years ago, several hundred people were there and sharing food and bringing people together, which is just a good way to be face to face. So it's a lot of people that are. It should be even more robust this year, that we aren't worrying about ICE picking people up at those kinds of locations. So that is a pretty big deal. We also have an organization, well, and Faith Action International is also holding some workshops and has a person on staff to advise about the process for status adjustment. And also there's an organization that is pretty great here called New Arrivals Institute, and they have classes every morning for the moms and of all ages with childcare. But they also do workshops, various things that need to be done. And of course, again, adjustment of status is probably the biggest thing. If we can do that locally instead of having people run up to Washington, that's certainly a better alternative.
Yeah, it certainly is. And Betty has her hand up.
I just wanted to, and I'm going to apologize. I'm about to lose my voice, so I'll be lucky to make it through chapter 7. But I wanted to point out that the family unity is really important, but so is the community unity in terms of the groups, the Afghans, the ethnic groups being together. Asheville last summer had a huge gathering of the Afghan families that had been resettled in the area. And at that point, we had our family for maybe a month, but we took them back up the mountain to this gathering. It was a potluck, and they brought their dishes, and it was really a good event. And to be able to bring the groups together for community among themselves is also really important, and something that they strive and that they hunger for. I think along that same line, the Asheville offices have been doing things like play dates, where they invite the children of in particular, the Afghan community to meet at certain places, and they do activities with them all day. In Hickory, we also have something called Centro Latino, which deals with Hispanic immigrants, workers. This particular organization also has classes for tutoring children, food pantries, things that help these people to establish their lives in the community and to become a part of the community.
Yeah, I think our community events are the most important thing that we do, and they're always so much fun as well.
Well, we had one in Hickory toward the end of the summer with the Afghan family, but we also invited, it was kind of interesting, there are people in Hickory that are from countries I never even knew were living in Hickory, and they've been here for years. And once we made known that this family is here, we had them kind of coming out of the woodwork, Pakistani, others coming. And at this particular community event that St. Andrews hosted, we had people from several different backgrounds, cultural Mideast backgrounds, that came to this picnic and became a part of the welcoming for this Afghan family. So that was probably one of the best things we did in Hickory. It wasn't a huge turnout, but it gave us an opportunity to meet others that were in the community that we really did not even know were here, and they become good friends.
Yeah, that's cool. Susan?
Yeah, I was just going to point out that the community reaction sometimes to minors, even especially coming to the community, can be really variable. In Greensboro, the American Hebrew Academy was on a lease to Homeland Security briefly, and I think the contract now has been in different status, but they were going to bring in a couple of hundred of young men who were between the ages of 13 and 17, unaccompanied at the border, who were here in a custodial sense. And this came up about, what, a year ago or so, I guess, the first time we heard about this. Disappointingly, the response by a lot of people was, well, who are these people and how are they vetted, and who's watching them, and what security is available? And my neighborhood didn't know about this, and I feel betrayed. And it was sort of shocking when you're considering that most people, if these kids were in your family, they wouldn't be called young men, they would be children or boys. And the fear would not have been so immediate and such a knee-jerk reaction. Unfortunately, Kathy Manning's office didn't do a great job of interpreting and explaining to the neighborhoods what was happening actually at the facility, what might happen. It was a great opportunity for employment for a lot of people once they were vetted. And when you go through some of the platforms like Nextdoor, which can be kind of a pit of misinformation out there, a couple people were fortunately aware of the vetting process for these poor kids who were here, kind of unwillingly for the most part, separate from their parents. And when you looked at the expense of education, security, and medical treatment, room and board, the objections that were raised were pretty strenuous. And so I think it kind of bears repeating that we all have open hearts, ideally, to the idea of sheltering the stranger, especially when they're a child. But communities don't always have the education and the information they need to really fully embrace that.
Good point.
I don't know quite how to put up the hand, but real quick. One of the things I did want to mention is that when our family, the Afghan family we had was in Montreat, that the police were extremely making sure that they made the family feel comfortable, which was amazing to me, that they put out a special offer that say, we'll come and talk to them to make sure they're not afraid of us or anything like that, and explain everything to them. So sometimes in the communities, it really makes a big difference when the police are willing to come out and help the families, because then the families weren't fearful of them. So that was a really great thing in that area.
And I found that here, like Jenny was saying, we have police who come to our Faith Action ID drives. Kat, the community resource officer, comes to pretty much everything that we have. Sometimes the police chief or other people show up. And I think that's been a really good thing in our community.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful discussion. I just wanted to add too that these spiritual values that Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services use to evaluate proposals for reform of the immigration system, I feel like they are also very relevant in other areas of reform. And particularly this week, one that comes to mind is the ICWA, Indigenous Children Welfare Act, which is being heard again. A case is being heard in Supreme Court this week. And that deals specifically with family unity and separation, has protected children from being separated from their families for a while now, but is at jeopardy, at risk of, being done away with again. So thank you so much, Mary, for sharing these and expanding on these spiritual values with us more from chapter 5. And Betty, I'm so sorry that your voice is, I hope that it lasts for chapter 7. I hope you're feeling all right. But we will jump into chapter 7 since we covered chapter 6 last week with Mary Campbell and discuss putting our feet on the Jericho Road.
Yeah, if it gets too painful to listen to, just mute me. Chapter 7 begins with the importance of justice and mercy above rituals, rites, and practices. He goes on to say that we recognize that today in America, there are many breaches to repair: broken immigration systems, desperate lives of millions of immigrants, plight of asylum seekers and refugees, suffering of those incarcerated without proper documentation, estrangement and tensions between citizens and non-citizens. And I think Mary's conversation, the conversation that we just had, is a perfect segue into chapter 7, because a major part of chapter 7 deals with examples of strong communities and congregations that are actually helping and working to heal those breaches. So the things that we've been talking about really lead well into chapter 7. The chapter points to many healers of these breaches found in the ELCA, as well as other ecumenical and interfaith partners. It makes the statement that communities that follow Jesus offer a unique and promising opportunity to heal the polarization that we have in our country and to move the immigrant conversation forward. Authors point out 2 spiritual practices that congregations must rediscover: exercising hospitality and connecting mercy and justice. Evidently feeling that in many cases, these 2 spiritual practices have fallen by the wayside, and we need to keep these 2 foremost on our agendas. According to the authors, "His dog barks loudest" is the ultimate compliment in the Arab world. Strangers on the road are welcomed, and the barking dog is the first sign of hospitality for the visitor. I found this amusing because in our country, and certainly in my neighborhood, it's the complete opposite. If you have a barking dog, it's a sign to stay away, not to come. But in the Arab world, that barking dog is a symbol or a sign of hospitality. The hospitable spirit is present in many Mideastern cultures. And I think those of us who are working with families from other countries, whether it's Mideast, African, Hispanic, we see this hospitality every day that we interact with these families. There is not a single time that I have ever been in the home of our family, and I've been in it many, many, many times, that the mother has not said, please have a cup of tea, or can I fix you something to eat? And I'm sure that those of you who have families experience the same thing. It is built into them and just part of their DNA to welcome and to do something to make the guest comfortable. The Hebraic phrase, Baruch haba, actually means blessed is the one who comes. I think that's gives us pause if we actually look at immigrants and we look at these people that are around us that come into our country as blessed people who come. I think our attitudes would often be different. But the Hebraic phrase, blessed is the one who comes, is the actual meaning of the word welcome. The Jericho Road, the Jericho Road is a metaphor for how we are to show mercy and justice to those we encounter. The parable answers the question, who is my neighbor? And it prioritizes the work of justice. In this chapter, the author highlights several congregations and communities where the vital work is being done to heal and repair breaches in our society. I'm not going to go through, and there were several examples of where strong work is being done to breach these gaps and to help these people that come into our country. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but I do hope if you haven't read chapter 7, you will take the time to read through some of those stories, because they are not only encouraging, but they're extremely inspirational. There are a couple that I will point out, and then I think these stories will lead us hopefully into a conversation that we can have with our own congregations and past experiences. One of the stories talks about a Congolese young girl named Lisa Katoko. Lisa Katoko was 15 years old when her family was taken away by government troops for supporting the deposed President Mobutu of the Congo. Her mother had gone earlier to Canada to seek asylum prior to Lisa's family's experience. All of her family was presumed dead except the mother. Lisa finally was able to get a way to Toronto to meet her mother and to reunite with her. However, at the JFK airport, she was detained and placed in a detention center because the authorities did not believe that she was only 15. I think they used her dental, her teeth to measure how old they thought she was, and they put her in a detention center for adults. The Metropolitan New York Synod's East African Ministry at Our Savior Lutheran Church in Jamaica, Queens, in cooperation with Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services and other family services, found out about Lisa's plight, and they came to her aid. They finally secured her release, but to another detention center in New Jersey. In these detention centers, she would sometimes spend 23 hours in a room with no windows, locked in that room. And needless to say, she became extremely depressed with her situation. When she was moved to New Jersey, there was the idea that, okay, they've moved her, so we're not going to have these people bothering us anymore as advocates for her. However, that didn't work. The group continued to advocate for her release from detention. And finally, due to their persistence, Lisa was set free to join her mother in Canada. This was one example that the authors gave of Lutherans working together to bring about mercy and injustice. In an interview with a fellow by the name of Christopher Vergara was a lay leader, and chair of the Metro New York Sanctuary Amparo Ministry. In this particular interview, he was asked what he thinks the church's role is with the Synod's program and with immigration issues in general. In response to that, I think his response was important enough. And if you have your books with you and want to look at page 153, Figaro gives his response to what he thinks the church's role with immigration issues is. And I'm going to simply read this. I think the church's role is to accompany these people through all of this and let them know that they are not alone, no matter the complications, racism, and xenophobia of the system. They are not alone. And as a church, we accompany them through this migrant journey because we are all on that journey. The church should do what it's called to do, accompany people womb to tomb and let them know they are not alone, especially the Lutheran Church. Provide them with that sense of community and outreach we are so good at building. I think our country needs to figure out a more humane and ethical immigration process because what we are doing, not only to these children, but to these families, is un-American and not to our benefit. The trauma that we are causing will be with us for generations. In this part of our history, it seems we have all forgotten that most of us came from someplace else. A poignant and touching remark, quote from Chris Vegara, who is of the Amparo Ministry. Another example that is given by the authors is an interview with Pastor Esther Lugomo, who tells the story of her experience from Tanzania and the discovery of a Swahili community of African refugees in Nashville, Tennessee. A Swahili community of African refugees in Nashville, Tennessee. The congregation that she worked with found out about this community and they worked together to develop educational programs for the refugees. When asked, what can the church do? Pastor Ngugomo responded that we need to focus on areas different from our white Caucasian American view. She states that we need to connect with new people, whether they are Christian or not. Preach to them, teach them, give them social services, medicine, education. From there, we teach them the love and grace of God, and then we are church together. In a similar interview, Sarah Erie of Lutheran Services of the Southwest was asked what should be done politically to address the humanitarian needs of our society. I think that we probably all encounter some tension and pullback when we try to politically juxtapose our church ministry and politics. When we get into the area of politics, there are many of those who say the church has no business doing that, and we should stay away from politics. When asked the question about political intervention, Ms. Erie of Lutheran Services acknowledged the decision to engage in political activity as a means to work for change, and acknowledged that it is a fine line to cross and to balance that. On page 163 in your book, she says, I think for me, my reticence with doing advocacy is that supporting refugees has never been political before. It's always been something that is very bipartisan. So I am a little concerned about putting it in the political arena. I feel we should continue to fight to take it out of that arena, but at the same time, we have experienced such tremendous flaws that we might be forced to go into that space and begin to fight for rights politically. I want to do it in a way that doesn't bring further division to the church. The last section of chapter 7 deals with LIRS and its Hope for the Holidays program. If your congregation has not participated in this, I would encourage you to go online for the toolkit and become part of an important ministry that is really quite easy to do. Our congregation has done this for several years, and it's become a really good intergenerational event with children and adults making these cards and sending them off together. This past year, LIRS received more than 14,000 cards from people across the country. That was enough for every child and family in detention in the 2 family detentions in Texas and the 1 center in Pennsylvania to receive a card and a gift. It was enough to send to other partners around the country and to send over 1,000 across the border to families remaining in Mexico. Chapter 7 closes out with an account of over 1,000 friends on foot walking the streets of Queens, New York with candles lit and chanting the Kyrie Eleison on Good Friday in the year 2007. The account that is given is a vision of unity and hope, as the authors call that, walking together into God's future. This chapter, as I mentioned earlier, is filled with stories of healing and hope. There are a number of stories of community, congregations, individuals, teams working together to breach and repair the broken system that we have, and to help these people become part of a welcoming community. So at this time, I would like to invite anybody, those of you that are on Zoom, to share your own stories, either past or present, that you might have that are meaningful to you and or to your congregation. I remember growing up in a church in Ashboro, and that church had probably I would say at least a 30 to 40% of its membership from Estonia and Latvia. These were people that had come over from World War II and that were welcomed by the Lutheran Church and became an integral part of the community. One of my best friends in high school was Latvian, and I can remember visiting her home where they still spoke the language that was the language of her parents. And it was always interesting to hear, and I just thought it was kind of cool that she had 2 languages that she was speaking, the English and then what she spoke at home. We saw the same thing at Ascension in Shelby. There was a number of Latvians who had come to that particular congregation and had been assisted. Our organist was Latvian, and she was wonderful, really great musician. So I'm sure all of you have stories that resonate with welcoming and the tradition that Lutherans have had in welcoming these in our community. And it's a reputation that we've got, and one that I think we want to hang on to as people who truly are welcoming to these people that need a new life, and how hard it is to leave where they've been and come to another country. I could not do what our family is doing in 6 months. I am absolutely amazed that they are able to pay most of their bills, their rent, their utilities. Transportation is still a problem because of that driver's license. Language is a challenge because of work schedules and trying to get ESL in, but the children are being tutored by volunteers in addition to their being enrolled in school. The mother will go into the doctor's office and she is the one who tells them that she's there and is to be seen. And they're becoming self-reliant, and it's amazing because it's so far. I mean, the country is so new to them, but I don't think I could do what they have done in a period of 6 months. And it's wonderful working with them.
Thank you.
So stories from you.
Stories of welcome.
Well, one of the things I thought I mentioned is that one of the neat things that's just happened with LSC here in Asheville is they've added 2 new members to their team, and they're both from Ukraine. And so I think that's cool that they both are, they're adding people that are going to be able to speak to people that are coming to this country, which is amazing that they found these 2 individuals that are very qualified to use that and with them. Also, I am new to all this program originally, and when I saw about the Hope for the Holidays, we're going to do that now this year. I just went in and got the toolkit today because I thought this is something we definitely should be doing. And there's so many programs that this was mentioned in this chapter that I think I'm going to make sure that we start getting involved in our congregation.
Yes, and I did put that link in the chat, and it will be in the recap newsletter that comes out next week as well, and on our website for the Bishop's Challenge. Dave?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to clarify a little bit for the folks that may not be aware of the Hope for the Holidays, the greeting cards, and when you go to the toolkit, as Cynthia has mentioned, it mentions that one person, so to speak, would be collecting the greeting cards that your congregation or your group has put together. The website gives you suggested words in Spanish that are encouraging from the greeting card perspective for the holidays. It doesn't have to be in Spanish, but they give you that information if you'd like to write that into the card. There's a deadline that the cards need to be mailed to LIRS by December the 2nd. So whoever's collecting them puts them all into one big envelope, takes them to the post office and gets them mailed. So not every individual card gets mailed separately in separate envelopes. They're all packaged together by what your group puts together.
And they ask you not put them in envelopes, each one in an envelope. They want them put in one large envelope.
And one other quick thing, and Mary may be able to speak to this. When I was in college many eons ago, we had an exchange student from South America that was, kind of struggling to learn the English language and partake in the engineering school. And I kind of befriended him, and he was so appreciative of the help that we were helping him work through the system. And Mary, I don't know if you have any of that at App State, and any contingent of international students that are also looking for some kind of guidance or help from the community. You're on mute, Mary.
I'm not directly involved in that, but a member of our congregation, he's also on church council with me, Jesse Ludabingwa, is part of the International Studies program, and he helps connect international students with others. And if they can't go home over the holidays, a lot of times they're like foster families that will have them stay with them or feed them meals and that kind of thing. And then there are international student groups on campus. Well, there's a lot of student groups, like there's Asian student group, Hispanic student group, and then kind of broader international student groups. And so they help with this connectivity as well.
Right. Lenoir has several international students, and it is the church for the last several years has helped to find them housing during those times that the door might be closed, and certainly to give them meals when we can. So we've had a couple that have actually been doing video streaming and that type of thing for church services. So the international students at Lenoir have been pretty active within the church and the college community, the university community.
I would love to share an update on our family at Lutheran Church of Our Father in Greensboro. We had a big anniversary 2 days ago. That was the day they came to Greensboro a year ago. Jenny was present for that. And if you've never been at the airport, when folks come in and meet their families, they're sponsoring them. It is an overwhelming, powerful experience. The looks on their faces, that there's fear and there's joy, and it's just a lot of mix of emotions on both sides, because as a sponsor, you're not sure exactly what to expect. But that day is in my head forever, I think now. And so our way of kind of commemorating that is they're coming to worship with us on Sunday, which is remarkable in itself, because most, we certainly don't push anybody to even try a different faith practice. But they've been very curious and they want to see what a Christian service looks like. And so they're going to worship with us on Sunday, and then we're setting up a reception afterwards. And our theme is, where in the world are you from? This kind of plays back into this, really the importance of that, the connection on congregation level of where your family came from when they were immigrants to this country in the first place. And so we have a giant map, and everybody's going to put a flag that represents where their family came from originally to this country. Very few Indigenous people in my congregation, so that shouldn't be, a side issue. But and then we're doing a dessert bar, and the desserts have to come from your country of origin. And so we're going to get a lot of different things. This family has got a tremendous sweet tooth, you wouldn't believe, which has led to a lot of dental problems, because not much Afghan dental care apparently. But for us, the big update has been the oldest son, who is sort of the man of the house. In this situation, there were 6 people that we sponsored, a mother and 5 children, ages 9 to 19. The father was trained in the Afghan army and worked with the American forces and was killed in action about 6 years ago. And that prompted their evacuation, back in August, the first step of their evacuation. And so the oldest son, who was 19 and a half when they first moved here, I guess, has been forced to kind of abandon his dreams of college for right now. And he works in a factory in Mocksville. He takes a 2-hour bus ride each way in a van with fellow Afghans, and works in a factory doing, I think they're blow-ins for packaging and assembling some packaging for furniture and that kind of thing. This is not his dream. He's a 20-year-old young man, and we're hoping that financially they'll become more stable ultimately. They've been able to move out of an apartment complex that was grim, to put it mildly, but it was what was available when they came here on an emergency basis, into a much nicer place. Instead of having 6 folks in 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, now they have three bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, which is much better. All the kids are in school. The oldest son, who is I guess he's a 17-year-old now, just got a part-time job after school at the Super G, which, if you're in Greensboro, you know what that is. It's an ethnic market. It's enormous. I mean, you can't imagine how vast it is. And they handle specialty products from all over the world. You can go there and get, anything you think of, really. So he's actually going to have spending money, and he'll be out in the world, seeing what it's like to be part of the American economy, which is, that's part of this process, right? But we are so grateful to have had this past year with them. It's taught all of us a lot. It hasn't gone perfectly, because it never does. We're all human. But we are blessed by their presence, and we hope that they feel that we're a blessing in their lives too.
Okay, if we don't have anyone who wants to share a story, I'd like to throw out a reflective question. Is that okay, Carissa?
Sure.
If I throw out
I had one more thought I was going to share, but you go ahead and share that first.
All right, for reflection, and would love to hear someone share. If you had a magic wand to make anything happen in your congregation concerning the road, putting your feet on the Jericho Road, immigration, if you had a magic wand, what would you like to see happen in your congregation? The sky's the limit. Or community.
think I'm drawn back to that spirit of hospitality and was it invitation that they encouraged at the beginning of the chapter? Like, I would love to see my congregation and community transformed into just a radically hospitable place that welcomes in that way that you were describing, Betty, at the beginning of the chapter. That the way that welcome is like embodied, embedded in the DNA of the Middle Eastern culture. And that's what I was going to mention, is that I reached out to a friend of mine, an Arab American Lutheran, when I read that quote in the chapter, because my family on my father's side are Lebanese immigrants to the US, and they were welcomed into Minnesota a couple generations ago. And when I read that, so there's that Middle Eastern heritage in my own family, I can easily and like readily identify just that spirit in my own family, but I never knew that was a part of, the whole culture. So I reached out to my friend to ask, and he shared that same definition of the word for welcome, saying that it translates into blessed is the coming. And he said that when I welcome you, I bestow blessing onto our situation together. In other words, welcoming is an act in which God is also a participant. So when I welcome you, I also welcome God. And he says that Arab and Middle Eastern community lives into this calling of community, that it's part of who we are, it's part of our identity. And when we welcome you into our community, you become part of us. We no longer see you as a stranger or as alien. I thought that was so beautiful and fit so well with what we're trying to do. He also shared this article that I wanted to just lift up to you. I put it in the chat, that was written by Dr. Ryan LaHerd, who was the retired president of Lenore Rhine.
Right.
And
Not too long ago. Yeah. He and
yeah,
Carol.
has
Carol LaHerd.
Lebanese ancestry as well. So that would be my hope for our communities, is to live into this sense of welcome in a really transformative way. Any other thoughts?
I think I go along with the welcome too, because we ran into, when our family first came to us, was that people were going, well, what are they going to want from us? What are they, I would rather them not look at it that way, but be more hospitable about it, open in the very beginning. And I wish that was what we had in the very beginning of our congregation as well.
Yeah. I'd love to share just a quick story with everyone. And Betty, this is what I was thinking about when you were talking about when you go to visit your family that you're helping with. They're welcoming, they provide all this food. So my father is from Yugoslavia, or now it's known as Slovenia. He crossed the border undetected in 1955. And then was able to get a sponsorship to America in a year later after living in Austria. So in 2021, I was able to go back and meet my family that we had lost touch with. But what was interesting was I asked to take me to the border where he crossed. So we went and saw where he crossed on foot. And then they took me to the house where he left his bicycle. And we didn't know who was at that house. My cousin just pulled into this house and parked, and she started walking around the house, and a man comes out and they start talking. I don't speak really any Slovenian, but what was so amazing to me is next thing you know, we're sitting down at their patio. They bring out all this food, and we spend the next hour just talking about who we are, and this American that came to visit, and find out that his uncle had crossed the border with my dad and that they were distant relatives of ours. But the whole idea of that welcoming and all that just made more sense, because growing up, I grew up in a community of immigrants, and you go to people's houses and you just sit there and you talk, and food comes out, drink comes out. And it just made so much more sense as you go back and you see where your family is from. And I think that that's one of the most special things that I could take away is that welcoming, that hospitality. It's just sharing food, breaking bread and just being with one another and spending time together. And I just wanted to, share that little story with you about it. There's so many other things I probably could share, but that was one of the most powerful pieces about being able to go there and visit and seeing where he left his bicycle and then went the rest of the way on foot to cross the border. So I just wanted to share that piece with y'all.
Thank you. That was really special. That had to be powerful.
Mhm.
All right, any closing thoughts for tonight? Well, this chapter 7 closes with a section on walking together into God's future. So I hope that we'll all be thinking about what is next for us, for our congregations, for our communities. And that's exactly what we're going to be touching on next week in our final session of the book study. We will welcome back the co-author, Pastor Stephen Bowman, to help us dream a little and envision what is next for us in this work of welcome.